This year in 2025, we have the first genuine championship battle that is close in 4 years, but it just isn't the same. The duel between the McLarens is tight, but just doesn't feel great. To truly relive that experience, we have to turn back the clock a little. 2021 had it all. To start at the season, expectations were high for almost everyone. Mercedes was hot off the back of the most dominant reign in the sport's history. They won every Constructors' Championship and Drivers' Championship for the last 7 years, and their ace Lewis Hamilton won 6 of those, with his latest equaling the all-time record of 7 World Championships by Michael Schumacher, and he was going for an 8th. And to accompany him, he also had the sport's most consistent driver of all time, Valtteri Bottas, to help him hold down the fort, a team that really looked untouchable for such a long time. But then there came Red Bull, a team that held the dominant reign before Mercedes and had the pairing of their academy-grown prodigy in the form of Max Verstappen alongside new signing Sergio Perez, and they came to play. A new car that could really compete, and the drivers to back it up well. But that's not where it ended. All down the grid there was excitement. McLaren was already in the ups in past years and made the change to Mercedes power units for 2021 and brought veteran and former race winner Daniel Ricciardo alongside their young star Lando Norris, and gave Ricciardo his first taste of above-average machinery since he left Red Bull. Ferrari also had some changes too, with signing Carlos Sainz and fielding the first Ferrari driver lineup without a driver's championship since 2007, where Kimi Räikkönen won it that year, and excluding that, it dates back to 1995 with Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger. They had a different setup than before, but they still were shooting high. Even in the midfield, Alpine was making their debut after the Renault rebrand and had Fernando Alonso make his way out of retirement through the hope of the team that helped him win his championships in the past. But they weren't the only rebrand on the grid, because we also had Aston Martin, a new face to the grid, and they brought on a 4-time world champion in the form of Sebastian Vettel. It's safe to say expectations were high for them, and even AlphaTauri was exciting. Pierre Gasly was driving in the best form of his career, and a new prospect in the form of Yuki Tsunoda would always be fun. The other teams were a bit lower in terms of expectations, and I'd be lying to say if I did expect a lot from them, but they still had a story to tell. Both Kimi Räikkönen and Antonio Giovinazzi were giving it their best go, with Räikkönen's timer till retirement ticking down, and Giovinazzi's seat given by Ferrari slowly dissipating. Finally, the Haas and Williams teams, which I'd be lying if I said they were the most prosperous, but regardless of slow cars, each team had one of each type of driver. A prospect that had fans intrigued and wanting to see more, and a meme pay driver that had the fans wanting to see less. It's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. A grid with a combined 14 world championships, 3 rookies, and 9 race winners, all that was left was to get racing. It all took off in Bahrain, where immediately Max Verstappen made his mark and took pole position. He started at the front, but Lewis Hamilton eventually passed him on lap 40 and took the win. Other notable performances throughout the GP were Valtteri Bottas coming 3rd, Lando Norris coming 4th, and Sergio Perez clawing back to 5th after a pit lane start on his Red Bull debut. Momentum stayed in Hamilton's favor the next time out at Imola, where he did take pole and looked solid to keep winning. But on turn 1, on a rainy day, leave it to Max Verstappen to take the lead. And immediately after, imagine my shock, Mazepin and Latifi brought out the safety car to help them hold position. Lewis Hamilton got passed once again on lap 40, but ran off track at turn 7, and right when he rejoined, the infamous Russell and Bottas crash ensued, and the rest of the race resulted in a Verstappen, Hamilton, and Norris podium, and level points going into round 3 in Portugal for the 2 title challengers. Portimao qualifying was not taken by either of those championship leaders, but rather Valtteri Bottas, and he kept the lead for a bit, until both Hamilton and Verstappen found their way through, and took the usual Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas podium for the final race we would see in Portugal. Next came Spain, where Hamilton took pole once again for the 100th of his career. But once again, he lost it at turn 1, and we saw a back and forth battle all throughout the race, which resulted in a win for Hamilton after a strategic masterclass. After that was Monaco, where we could finally see a change from the Mercedes and Red Bull sitting pretty with pole, and Charles Leclerc took it in his home country. but unfortunately, his crash in Q3 sustained issues that meant he couldn't start the race the next day. And back to the typical programming, Verstappen took the win, and Sainz and Norris closed out the podium, and with that came Max Verstappen's first championship lead of his career. Now, once again, Leclerc took pole in Baku, where he was actually able to start this time, and he did end up leading the race for one lap before Lewis Hamilton passed him at turn 1 on lap 2. Verstappen gained the net race lead through a pit stop holdup, and all was going Verstappen's way until a tire failure with 6 laps to go. Hamilton had it all to gain until he left the magic button pressed and sailed through turn 1. And it did result in a lovely podium of Sergio Perez getting his first win with Red Bull, Sebastian Vettel getting Aston Martin's first podium in P2, and Pierre Gasly rounding it out at P3. Now, from the races I've gone over, you kind of get the gist, jockeying back and forth between Hamilton and Verstappen, and that really was the case for a while. But Verstappen won 3 in a row from the 2 races in Austria and the French GP, giving him a 32-point lead from there. But I also want to bring some attention to the midfield. At this point in the season, you can kind of write off Williams, Haas, and Alfa Romeo, as out of the 3, Alfa Romeo had only scored 2 points and the other had none, but that was kind of to be expected. Also, even though they had that podium in Baku, Aston Martin were somewhat in a no man's land, with being clear of the other 3 that I mentioned, but not being nearly consistent enough to keep up with the others ahead. What was not expected was the heated battle between AlphaTauri and Alpine. In the first 9 races, Pierre Gasly and Fernando Alonso only had 2 and 3 appearances outside of the points respectively, and Esteban Ocon did have a bit of a struggle with 4 races without points, but he was still definitely pulling his weight. For Yuki Tsunoda, he was a rookie, what can you really expect? He'd scored points and made some errors too, but this was just the start for this battle. The same also goes for the battle in P3 and P4 in the championship with Ferrari and McLaren. Both Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz were getting settled into their new teams, and Leclerc and Norris were also doing incredibly well, so it set another tight battle and created tiers of F1, where not every team was fighting for the same goal, but each was in a tight battle of their own. Except Aston Martin, that is. Anyways, back to the races. The midseason was pretty chaotic, with the next race being in Silverstone, and as you will all remember, the Cops Corner incident between Hamilton and Verstappen. It was a big tone setter in the championship, and a short shift to Hamilton running the series for a bit, but no one could really expect what came next. The race in Hungary was nothing short of cinema, and it could be a movie in its own right, and it all started with a bit of Bottas bowling, where he took out half the field, with most of them being those in the typical top positions, and those who weren't taken out sustained pretty big damage. But the miracle of Lewis Hamilton getting strategy wrong and Fernando Alonso putting on the moves, Esteban Ocon took a win, and Latifi scored a P7, and Sebastian Vettel both scored and got disqualified from the podium. Entertaining race, but in the grand scheme of the battles we had, championship favor tipped towards Hamilton, Alpine took a big step over AlphaTauri, and Williams had separated themselves from the back markers massively in this race with 10 points between their 2 drivers. After that was another weird one in Spa, where it was too wet to actually run the race, so qualifying was the decider for points, and only half points were awarded. Throughout qualifying, everyone thought the driver to shock everyone would be Lando Norris after setting the timesheets alight, but after he crashed in Q3, the man who beat him in F2 was the one who stole the show, and George Russell qualified P2. He was ahead of Lewis Hamilton and behind Max Verstappen, but not having the race actually worked in his favor because there's no way he would have held on to P2. Then came Zandvoort with another typical Verstappen win in his home country, and the 2 Mercedes following up, and then another spanner in the works in Monza. A solid qualifying for the McLarens meant they started up at the front with Max Verstappen, and Daniel Ricciardo took the lead early on, and after a slow pit stop for Verstappen, he came out alongside Hamilton and gave the perfect moment to show why the halo exists. This allowed Daniel Ricciardo to take his most recent win and his only one not in a Red Bull, and made for a 1-2 for McLaren, which was their first win since 2012, and it reinvigorated McLaren in the fight against Ferrari. After that was the Russian GP, which was the heartbreak for Lando Norris. Right after McLaren glory, it was looking like the double was on after Lando took his first ever pole position, but heartbreak came when not pitting when he needed to get on the wet tires. This handed Lewis Hamilton his 100th win, and I couldn't imagine the social media antics going on if this were to happen to Norris now. Turkey was next, where Valtteri Bottas took his only win of the season, and my personal highlight of the weekend was Mick Schumacher reaching Haas's only Q2 of the season. Kinda sad, but a very overlooked moment, and also Verstappen retook the lead of the championship in Turkey. The next 5 races were all 1-2s for Verstappen and Hamilton, but they had some key moments to point out. In the USA, back when there was only one GP here, Verstappen extended his lead to 12 points, and won again in Mexico City, and for the first time in a long time, it looked like Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes were officially not the favorites. The only thing that could bring him back would be a miracle drive, and surely that wouldn't happen, right? After Hamilton got disqualified from qualifying for the sprint weekend in Brazil, all hopes looked lost. But between the sprint race and the feature race, he climbed from 20th to 1st and made it known that he was down but not out. With 3 races to go and Hamilton 14 points behind, he had to win both to make sure he stayed in it, and that he did, with a win in Qatar, leading every lap, and a bit more of a controversial win in Jeddah, but controversy doesn't change the amount of points awarded. All that led to the final round where the two were level on points and had all to play for. A 7-time champion looking to be the first to reach 8, and a driver looking to bag his first. Who would come out on top? Well, actually, I'm going to talk about something else first. If you didn't notice, I didn't talk about the midfield at all in those last 5 races, so let's get a little roundup. Ferrari were far more consistent than McLaren and pulled away in the battle for 3rd, and a podium in Qatar for Fernando Alonso and a near podium in Jeddah for Esteban Ocon put Alpine in the driver's seat for the fight with AlphaTauri. And on the topic of the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes were actually being threatened by Red Bull a little, but they had a lead of 28 points going into Abu Dhabi, which was nearly impossible to lose. In total, the final race had a good amount of things to look for, obviously the battle between Hamilton and Verstappen for the championship, but also a 3-way fight for 5th, 6th, and 7th between the 2 Ferraris and Lando Norris. And obviously, the battle of the back markers to see if they could score any points to thrust them up multiple slots in the championship. Anyways, I'm sure many of you know how this goes, so I'm just going to cut to the chase. Verstappen scored pole, and although he got passed early on, Lewis Hamilton was instructed to give up his advantage that he gained for going off track, and he ended up gaining a huge lead that only really dwindled when Sergio Perez defended extremely well when sticking it out on old tires and bringing Verstappen back into the fight. But it didn't really matter. Verstappen couldn't really get past, and all looked like it was over. Hamilton was an 8-time world champion until Latifi spun. The safety car came out, and in order to keep position, Hamilton stayed on his old tires, and Verstappen pitted for the new softs. But it didn't seem to matter, as there's no way the cars would unlap themselves in time, and the race would finish under safety car. But no. The race was resumed with 1 lap to go after only unlapping the cars between Verstappen and Hamilton. On the newer tires, Verstappen made his way past and became F1 world champion. Regardless of what you think of the ordeal, you can't deny that the season as a whole was incredible, and it came down to the wire, which is incomparable to anything since then. About those other lines to follow, Carlos Sainz finished 5th, Lando Norris 6th, and Charles Leclerc 7th in the championship, and none of the backmarkers scored, mostly because Mick Schumacher was the only one of them to finish the race. Regardless, 2021 was one of the best F1 seasons not just in recent memory, but of all time, and we really didn't know we were in the glory days until they were already gone.